So today we're going to be talking about festivals in New Kingdom Egypt, and we'll focus on the ones that are in the syllabus content points. That is Opet, the beautiful festival of the valley, and also the Heb-Sed festival. But it's important to realise that the ancient Egyptians also celebrated personal festivals, so birthdays, the God celebration day, births, marriages, deaths, etc. Remember that after the funeral and everything that had happened there, they would have a feast to commemorate the dead. So being together, and celebrating was very important in Egyptian society generally. But today we are going to talk about mostly the particular festivals in the syllabus. So I'm just going to try and move forward. So thinking about how the ancient Egyptians viewed festivals, is it the same as the way that we think of festivals? Now, most of you have probably been to a festival, some sort of music festival, laneways festival, food festival. What does that actually mean to us? If we think about the word festival, it actually comes from the old word feste, meaning feast. And, is that the same for the ancient Egyptians? Were festivals about food? Were they about religion? Were they about politics? And we have to think about what the important festivals in New Kingdom Egypt were and why they were important. So I want us to stop and have a look at this picture for a second, because what we see here is the representation of the Opet festival. Found it on this really cool National Geographic website actually about the Opet festival, so you might want to have a look at it. But what I think is really cool is that when we see pictures in ancient Egypt, they often look very like brown, the blue sky. This actually shows us what Egypt would have looked like with all the colour, all the excitement, all the movement. And we can see the massive pylons or gateways there. And if you look on the top right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that there's a blue thing that looks like, wings on it. That's actually the roof. And if you look just below that, you can see through into the temple and you can see how much darker it is. And that kind of talks about what we were saying the other day about temple architecture, that you would move from the courtyard through the pylons into this area, which was the hypostyle hall, which was darker, more columned, and going further in until you saw the god. So the other things to think about is you can see sort of almost in the centre of the screen what looks like a golden sphinx, but it's actually got a ram head. So of course that will be our representation of Amun as a ram sphinx. And you can see that there are a number of them going down the avenue, and I'm actually going to show you a picture of that in a minute. You'll also see at the bottom of the picture that there's what looks like a boat with like a little room or building on it that is wrapped in a cloth, and some men are carrying that. So that's going to be part of the festival, and we'll talk about that as we move through. And you can see all around the people, they're cheering, they're waving to the boat. So what's this boat business all about? So the Opet festival its official name was the Beautiful Feast of Opet, and the word Opet actually means the inner sanctuary from the temple at Luxor. So what would actually happen is that the god Amun was placed in that little boat, in that little room, and it was wrapped, because he was so holy, and it would go on a journey from the temple of Karnak. So if you look in the top right-hand corner, that's the temple of Karnak. It would go down to the temple of Ma'at and to the sacred pool, and then it would go down to the temple of Luxor, and it would go on a journey. And this journey could take up to 11 days in the early part of the New Kingdom. And then as time went on, it became the most important festival. In fact, this was celebrated even into Christian times, so up until the 300, 400 AD/CE, because it was considered so important. And even Alexander the Great, when he took over, celebrated the Opet festival. It was located in Thebes, and that's one of the things I want you to have a think about. And the pharaoh would actually accompany Amun on his journey, and the people would watch and celebrate. And some of them would actually carry questions or prayers on a little piece of paper and throw them to the god in hope that he would answer them. So there are those sphinxes that you can see. So that's the Avenue of the Sphinxes. That's one of the journeys that he could take. Sometimes, though, they didn't take him by the road between the Sphinx, it's called the Avenue of the Sphinxes, between Karnak and Luxor. They would actually take it on a ship. And it was a beautiful ship made of cedar from Lebanon, and it was covered in gold. It had a ram's head, and it was just exquisite. You saw the picture in the earlier one. And it was actually rowed by officials and priests and nobles who considered it a great honour. And what they would do once they got, oh, sorry, I'm just going to go ahead of myself. You can see here that this festival is so important to the gods, because what we see here is a representation of the festival from the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut at Karnak. And she dedicated this chapel to this festival because this is where the god's boat was actually stored while it wasn't being used. And you can see that there are a number of men holding the boat. They're carrying it on a stretcher. But if you look about four people from the right, you'll notice that the man has what's a little tail dropping down. That's the bull's tail, and that's Hatshepsut, even though he's not wearing the headdress because he's a priest at this time. He's still filling his priestly role. So it's an indicator that the pharaoh considered it an honour to carry the gods as well. I think it's really cute too. If you look up at the top of the picture, either side of that little building, that you can see that there's little fan bearers. So they were kind of, fanning the statue of the god to keep him cool. Important to remember too, sorry, I didn't talk about this earlier, that this was held in the second month of Opet. So think about why that might be important. So once they get to Luxor, the pharaoh actually takes the statue and he carries it into the temple. And they're dancing, there's singing, there's acrobats, there's officials. It's huge. It's like when Meghan and Harry were here. And then Amun is reunited with his consort. They have a bit of a remarriage ceremony, and there's rituals to re-energize the god and the pharaoh, because remember, the pharaoh is God on earth. And there are lavish offerings of food and drink made to the gods, and unfortunately he's not feeling very peckish right now, and so he doesn't get to eat it all, and so anything that's left over gets redistributed to the people. I do want to talk about this little source down the bottom here though. This is a limestone fragment, so this is not your big official sandstone wall relief or something in a chapel or something in a tomb. This is something personal. So someone has used a piece of broken limestone and recreated the carrying of Amun. And to me, that's really quite significant because it shows that this wasn't just an official thing, that this was something important enough for someone to want to capture personally. So some things to think about. So what we're going to do with these questions is you can either pause the video now and actually try and write some of these questions out or answers out, or you can keep going and answer them at the end. And we'll do a little bit of a chat conversation at the end of this video so that we can see if we're all on the same page. So why Thebes? Okay, why did the pharaoh personally carry the statue into Luxor? How did this festival help the pharaoh's popularity? Why do they have the re-energizing ritual and the marriage ritual? Why would the cult of Amun want to carry the statue around in public? Okay, remember it was usually hidden away and only the priest could access him and dress him and clothe him. Why is he now out in public? And do you think that people really cared about Amun-Re? Are they in it for the holy, or is there something else going on? So next festival is the beautiful Festival of the Valley, okay? And this was held in the second month of Shamu each year, so remember what Shamu was. And this festival was thought to date back to the Middle Kingdom. Oh, sorry, forgot to tell you that the Opet festival was really only celebrated during Hatshepsut, in the New Kingdom. It didn't really predate that. We know about it definitely from Hatshepsut. Probably happened before her, but we're not quite sure with the Opet festival just how recent it was. Now, in this instance, there's still some statue action involved, but we've now got Mut and Khonsu along for the ride, as well as the pharaoh. And what they would do is they'd start off the Temple of Karnak, they'd walk down to the Nile, cross the Nile, and then do a bit of a tour of all the mortuary temples of the deceased kings. And so they'd stop in, check in to see that the king was okay, everything's going well, and then it would go down to the last mortuary temple, cross over the Nile, and then go back to Luxor. The festival seems to have been one that commemorated the dead and the renewal of the dead. Because remember, the Egyptians didn't believe that once you died, you actually died forever, that you could still communicate. And people would actually follow the festival, and it would take many days to make this kind of journey. And they would take food and drink offerings for their deceased ones. So it wasn't just about kings. You would actually, because remember, everyone was buried on the west bank of the Nile, and you would go and sit and almost like have a picnic with your dead ancestors. Some people even slept there because they felt they could communicate with the dead in their sleep. It was a consciousness raising thing, because remember, as long as you had a cast statue or representation and a false door, you could escape the tomb and communicate with the living. So, they would also leave large floral tributes. So why flowers? What is it about flowers that might be important? Why celebrate the dead? Okay, what does this tell us about ancient Egyptian beliefs? And how will this festival help the pharaoh? Okay, so having a think about that. So you can either pause now or you can keep going. Let's see how we go. The last one we're going to look at is the Heb-Sed festival, which is also known as the Pharaoh's Jubilee. And it's also known as the Feast of the Tail, because guess what? The king wears a false tail during it, or an animal tail. So it was most usually a bull's tail, because a bull was a symbol of strength and warrior king. And it's actually thought to be one of the most ancient festivals, dating back to the start of the Old Kingdom. If you remember our step pyramid from Joseph, that was actually built to represent a Heb-Sed festival area. Okay, so this is how far back we're going. And it was celebrated at 30 years, and then every 3 or 4 years after that, although some pharaohs did hold them earlier. And it was the whole purpose of this festival was to prove the pharaoh's fitness to rule. And it was thought that during this festival, the king actually died and was reborn, and then he was recrowned. So he went through a second coronation to kind of rejuvenate his kingship. The word "sed" actually in Egyptian means slaughter, and so some historians have argued that if a king wasn't fit to rule, because he had to do all these rituals, and including running around the courts and so forth, if he couldn't do that, then he wasn't fit to rule and he had to be killed. But other historians have said no, it was a ritual or symbolic death. Some aspects or some parts of the ritual were actually done twice. Have a think about why. And this whole purpose was to show his fitness and also to renew his authority and his relationship with the gods. It involved elaborate temple rituals and include processions and offerings and acts of religious devotion. Now, one of the things that the pharaoh was supposed to do was erect a Jed column. Now, think about what the Jed is and why that might be important for the king. What you see down the bottom there is a reconstruction of Amenhotep III's Heb-Sed festival. He's really interesting because he had 3. He ruled for 40 years. Why do you think they would have a jubilee after 30 years particularly? Have a think about that. He had one at 30 years, 34 and 37. That means the year of his reign, not how old he was at the time. And you remember that his palace Malkata was also built to represent his Heb-Sed festival, as well as being, dedicated to his wife Nefertari. So you can see him raising the Jed pillar there. You can see behind him is his wife Nefertari, and she's got the 2 feathers on there showing that she's the god's great wife. Behind her are actually their daughters, so they're the king's daughters, and they're actually shaking their sistrum, which are Egyptian sort of musical rattles. You can see on the left-hand side that there's some guys in spotty outfits. They are priests, because priests often wore leopard skins as part of their duties. And you can see below with the Jed pillar that there's a guy with a sash. He's also a priest. And the 2 guys who are making offerings, and you can see food and flowers and bread in there. So this was a really important celebration. Now, interestingly, Hatshepsut actually celebrated her Heb-Sed in her 16th year, but some historians argue that no, she actually dates the beginning of her reign back to her father's death, which was 30 years previously. And she claimed direct authority from him, kind of just ignoring her husband, Thutmose II, who honestly was a little bit lame. So why would the king do this at 30 years and every 3 years after? So thinking about that, why would they do some parts of the ritual twice, and why the Jed, and how would this festival help the pharaoh? So that's us for now. So I'll give you a few minutes to have a think, and then we'll come back and we'll have a chat about it online through Teams. Bye.